Welcome to Cultivated Live for Thursday, March 7th, 2024. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of Cultivated Live right here on cultivated.news. Since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be reader first and providing the cannabis industry with the most important, insightful, and useful information to our audience. And until last week or a couple weeks ago, we did that through our daily newsletter, and we absolutely want you to subscribe to that. So in the show notes, you will find out how to do that. But we also know that the industry is on LinkedIn and YouTube and a variety of other places. So we are broadening our offering to those channels, including this daily live stream. And here's what we do on this daily live stream. We recap the most pressing news of the day with our guest, and then we jump into a conversation with said guest. And today is Thursday, and on Thursdays, or most Thursdays, I'm joined by Krista Raymer, the founder and CEO of Vetrina, the foremost retail consultancy in the cannabis space. Krista, welcome.
Jay, fresh on a Thursday.
I like starting the day with you because I always learn something. Today, we're going to learn about two things, hopefully maybe more, that you've been posting on LinkedIn, where I follow you, and everybody should, so follow Krista. One is about the importance of Super Bowl weekend to cannabis. The other is maybe a subset of that, but also broader, which is components of a cannabis sale, because I think we want to break down the component parts to make everybody's operation better. But before we do that, can we jump into the news?
Yes, let's do it.
Also, think about what else we want to talk about. But those are the two things I want to talk about. So we'll get there in a sec. So, Krista, here's what's driving the news. As more jurisdictions around the world legalize cannabis, global legal sales are set to hit $58 billion in just 4 years, according to a new forecast from our friends at BDSA. It's still kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the global beer or liquor markets, but a nearly $60 billion industry is nothing to sneeze at. And now here are some of the details. BDSA expects legal cannabis sales to grow at a 10% compound annual growth rate, which CAGR, if you're like an MBA, that's meaningful to you. That's the measure of the average growth rate for about $36 billion today. They expect much of that growth, of course, to come from the U.S., which accounts for about 56% of total cannabis sales now. And the forecast for cannabis sales is quite difficult to predict, obviously, because there's not a great data collection around the world, but also illicit sales, which comprise a bulk of the market. But it's clearly a rapidly growing market, which we always talk about and keep our eye on. That sounds like a big, giant number, Krista, but I guess it's impossible to know if it is, like, what it's going to mean.
I mean, it's all relative. Did you see that Canada yesterday came out with the reference of cannabis sales to
beer?
I think it was beer and cider.
Yeah. It outpaces that, and probably the tax collected of both, does. Yeah, it's interesting. And that people are buying less alcohol just generally, especially younger generations. They're not necessarily buying less, but they're drinking less. I guess the frequency is less. The frequency is the same. The quantity is less, which makes a big difference. I'm being very specific, but cannabis sales have jumped, and sort of the swap of the two, which I believe, anecdotally, I believe it.
Yeah, I think that is also why there's so many people paying attention to hemp beverages as well.
Yeah. It also came up in our conversation earlier this week in New Hampshire, which has similar model actually to Ontario, where the state controls alcohol sales. They're like the wholesaler and the retailer. And so cannabis sales, which they seem to want to legalize, they kind of have to because the rest of New England has. It really, they are looking at it from all kinds of levels. Like, what do we do with cannabis? Yes. How is it going to impact our alcohol sales? Yes. It's also a relatively low tax state, so they get lots of tax revenue from, they make money from alcohol sales. And so what is their role in cannabis sales? But if they can't really be plant touching if it's federally illegal, it was down this rabbit hole. But it is interesting to see sort of this growth and how it affects different jurisdictions. And we're dealing with it here in Canada, certainly where I am. Yeah. I want to shift a sec to DC, so the federal government in the US, because it is a big week. Not only was Super Tuesday on Tuesday, and we have the two nominees who are going to be running for president, but today is actually the president's State of the Union. So we put out a little note on LinkedIn that the prevailing cannabis wisdom right now suggests that President Biden will mention cannabis in his speech tonight. We'll see, but probably around sort of social justice reform and pardons that he has initiated, although it's not massive leaps, and probably not around the pending decision from rescheduling, I think that's probably a safe bet. Yeah.
I,
So you don't want to take the bet. That's fine. But it
I'm
actually
not
has to
taking
stop
the bet.
others from actually talking about cannabis in DC. So yesterday, my home state Senator Elizabeth Warren said marijuana is less addictive than alcohol, and alcohol isn't even on the schedule. She's obviously calling for descheduling along with 11 of her colleagues in the Senate. And one of those colleagues is actually the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who is also said this week that he wants the Safer Banking Act to actually have that bill passed before November's election. He continues to yes, be an advocate, but also set the goalpost just further and further away. So oh, we're going to do it this year, but that's not this year. It's going to be next year. And then it's okay, not next year, but before the November election. So we will see, because as you get closer to November, you get closer to election season and it becomes much more complicated. That's all to say, we expect today in DC, the President's State of the Union to actually mention cannabis in some way, some form or fashion. We'll see. Krista, can we shift to what I like to talk to you about, which is cannabis retail?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Please.
You posted something earlier this week talking about the
Yes.
importance of Super Bowl Sunday to cannabis. I didn't read the
Yes.
whole thing. Is it one of the big holidays? Is it 420, Green Wednesday, New Year's? Is this one of the biggies?
It is probably one of the biggest missed opportunities over the last, I would say, 2 years. But if we look at the data from this past year, it shows as a big, big opportunity. When I was going down this path of asking whether we should look at Super Bowl, my sense was that there was ethnographic behavior that our customers had in common that could influence the way that they purchase cannabis. We didn't necessarily set out to be this is one of the new cannabis holidays. But I think that's ultimately some of what we found. So the team from Surfside was amazing. And what we did was we specifically looked at how sales were changing as comparison to the leading weeks. So not just to say, do we compare the Saturday and Sunday of Super Bowl to a 420 or to another big holiday, but how does that compare to relative leading weeks? Because I think that's important to understand lift. And then how did the customer purchasing behavior actually change? And it's in that you're actually looking at a traditional calendar. We usually start holidays or we finish holidays after kind of the holidays or New Year's, and then don't really pick up a big holiday for promotions in cannabis until 420. But there is this really important set of dates right in the middle that is now basically Super Bowl that I think for next year, if we pay attention to it from the way that we build promos, could be really effective.
Yeah, that's all to say also that I think all of the final teams in the NFL were from legal states. So
yeah, we did, when we were talking about doing it, we wanted to do a bit of an analysis by also state. And what's interesting is since we've posted it, there's people from places for example, Michigan, who were commenting that they saw specific strain sell through in a particular way until their team was out. And so if you look at the data, there are maybe indications even within retailers' own data that aren't connected to the states that were part of the Super Bowl, that the other parts of the season influenced sales as well.
Yeah, because Detroit, I'm going to screw this up, but I think Detroit played San Francisco, so Michigan and California, and Baltimore played the Chiefs, so Missouri and Maryland. So those are big states, big legal states, some of them newish, but it is interesting to see if that factors in. But I also think it underscores the need to understand what's going on in and around your location. Big picture football, but also, there may be major events in your community that actually can drive sales. And it'd be interesting also, college towns, right? When Michigan, the University of Michigan has a game in town versus out of town, what do those relative sales look like? And I'm sure there's localized data that says the same thing. But thinking about that sort of in between holiday, if you will, a February holiday that doesn't exist before, but thinking about it, is it, I think what you just said is it's not necessarily the 2 days build up to Super Bowl Sunday, but it's really what does that 2 weeks before the Super Bowl actually look like? How to factor that into your promotions calendar, into sort of your product array and your inventory. And what are some of the simple things that folks should be doing in their retail operation, aside from just thinking about it and sort of gearing up?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about Super Bowl, there's a couple core areas that we would want to think about within the retail environment. And that is inventory. So like, what assortment do we have to be able to support the way that our customers might change their purchasing? What team members do we have in place, and what education do they need to be able to support those customers in the way that they're going to be purchasing? And then what promos and or marketing initiatives do we need to support our customers purchase in the way that we want to see? What's really interesting with Super Bowl is that it was a lot of the customers that were already purchasing. So it didn't present as an opportunity where there were new customers coming into stores to purchase. This was like your pre-existing customer base changing the way that they purchase product. So with that, it's like, okay, it calls for paying attention to your local.
Oh. Krista, I think your mic, your mic. Let it catch up for 1 sec. Oh. I think your microphone. Oh no. She will come back. There we go. Yeah.
I'm back.
You were talking about same customer, not a new customer, but the same customer coming in gives opportunity to think about what we can, I don't know, add to that sale that they're already in for.
Yeah, and what product categories are going to be relevant to that customer when they're there. So with Super Bowl, we specifically saw like shareable consumption products. If we think about the behavior of the customer, it's almost like, I think about it a lot like Thanksgiving, where you have all of your friends over or your family members over, and you don't get that same type of behavior around other, say, for example, sporting events or other areas of the customer's life. This is really unique to Super Bowl. And so we saw things like beverage sales as well as pre-rolls do really, really well, shareable based products that are convenient, very different product set, an array of purchasing than 420. And so it's different. It's important to like not apply and just say, here is the new 420, because the behavior of how the customer is purchasing is really different. Yeah. And who is purchasing is also really different.
Yeah. Can we shift for a second? Because I think it actually is part of this conversation. I've heard you and the team both write about, talk about, and I've been privy to sort of some of your internal conversations talking about too, but like, how do you break down, like I go to a dispensary, what are the components of that sale to me? Like if I'm a bud tender, what should I be thinking about when that person comes in? Because I think that's relevant to certainly Super Bowl, but also every day.
Yeah, it's completely relevant to Super Bowl because it could influence the way that you build a promotion, what products get put on promotion and when, and then also how your teams sell them. So there's two core components of a sale. There's your hero product or your basket driver, which is the product that the customer intends to purchase. So let's say, Jay, you talk about pre-rolls a lot. You're like going to your local store to purchase a pre-roll. And then there is impulse. And impulse are going to be those emotionally driven decisions. Now, they could happen online or they could happen in store. And typically, I think as an industry, we talk about impulse being like under a certain price point and certain form factors, but that isn't necessarily the case. It's like impulse is driven by the emotional decision of the customer. And therefore, if you develop a compelling enough promotion that pulls on the emotion of the customer, it could also be an impulse offer. So you could do an impulse offer of something like 8s. It doesn't have to only be edibles, pre-rolls, and beverages, which is like typically what people talk about. So your promotion should have hero promotions as well as impulse-driven promotions, different touch points for each of those, and also potentially different channels of distribution to talk about them as well.
And it calls on that sort of broad picture, but it also is the individual relationship you have with that customer. I think you're going to tell me if I'm wrong, but like if I understand why you're there, what you came in for, why you came in for it, then I'm able to, as a bud tender or someone working on the floor, understand what might be an interesting other purchase, right? Or add-on purchase that might be interesting for you because you're going, in this case, you're going to a Super Bowl party. You said, oh, I'm going to buy an ounce because there's going to be tons of people that are going to smoke. Well, have you thought about this type of thing to add on to the purchase to make it a better experience or something?
Totally. It's all comes back to set and setting. So if you understand your customer set and setting, then you can identify very quickly what the product hero or driver is, and then also what the relevant impulse driven products that could happen that are complementary. Ultimately, at the base of this, what we're trying to do is make sure that we are making the right recommendations for the customers in front of us.
Right.
And that's the thing where sales for bud tenders often feel really icky, because we are trying to recommend products that maybe our customers are like, why are you talking about this with me? It's like, no, if you are upselling, cross-selling, using impulse products properly, it will feel super relevant to the customer because you've uncovered the right information beforehand.
Yeah. And I think we know, I mean, I think of an example like maybe a restaurant, like other retail environments where it feels like, oh yeah, that is exactly what I was sort of thinking about. Like it is a nice add-on purchase because it does complement what I'm doing already. And I think we know that. We know when it feels right, we know when it feels wrong. It's getting it to feel right more often in sort of dispensary, that I think is certainly on the bud tender, but also on the folks that enable the bud tenders.
Right, right. It's like when you think about restaurant examples, everybody's always like, do you want cheese with that or do you want fries with that? And it's like such an easy concept in theory, but in practicality, when you think about a cannabis dispensary, what is the cheese or what are the French fries? And they're really different. If you say, do you want French fries with your pasta? You would never say that makes sense.
Right.
But that is literally the guidance that we are giving bud tenders by not being super specific on how to uncover the right influence. Like we know what food gets purchased most commonly together. There would be lots of people out there that want French fries with their pasta, I'm sure. But for the majority of the people who are right, but for the majority of the people that are in a restaurant, does that make sense? And so that is like, we've got to give that level of information when we're talking about saying, do you want fries with that? Or like, do you want cheese with that? Like, no, we have to give the pairing options that make sense.
I actually like the example. It sparked in me. Like when you're at the airport and you're waiting for your flight and it's obvious you're at the bar. Like all this, the set and setting is always the same, right? People are getting on a flight. You order a drink at the bar. They're like, do you want to make it a double? It's like, I like 90% of the people must say yes.
You're impulsive, like you're outside of your regular everyday norm behavior, and then all of a sudden you're like emotionally driven. I'm like, yes, I'm going on vacation, I want a double.
Like
whereas if you were a traveler and you could tell that this person travels all the time, they might not say yes to that, and that's probably not the crew to ask. But the guy that shows up with his like vacation hat, 100% you're asking him if he wants a double.
I want a double right now, and it's 10:18 in the morning. I'm just kidding. Krista, I always appreciate talking to you. Anything else we should have our eyes and ears on as the year rolls on? Because it's, we're about a month from 420. Any tips and tricks? Is it too late to start planning for that?
It is not too late to start planning for 420. And thinking it and looking at 420, it's really about pulling and pushing demand around. So if you want to win 420, it's not going to be the moment or the day of sales. It's going to actually happen after the period's over, which is interesting that you asked that, because in the Super Bowl report, we actually noted that like the Monday after Super Bowl was quite strong as well.
Really?
And so for 420, putting together a plan on how you get your customers back in store for the week and the 2 weeks after 420 is going to be where you can kind of control this push and pull around of demand.
Yeah, I think I recall maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, we've been talking for a long time, but like, April can be a normal, like in aggregate, a normal month because 420 is so big, but the 2 weeks post, or people are waiting to buy on 420 because they know the good deals and they buy a lot on 420. So they don't need to come back for the rest of the month. But are you still seeing that? Do you expect to see that? Or are people planning better the lead up and the post 420 for the full month?
I hope that we're planning better. If we look at last year's data, people started 420 promotions like up to 2 weeks beforehand, which I think is just handing out discounts to customers that were already going to be purchasing. There, you have to segment your customer and understand who is going to wait to purchase for 420 and who isn't going to, and like what promotions are you offering. And to be really specific about what that actually looks like is if you have a customer base that reoccurringly purchases eights, for example, it might not make sense to put eights on a 420 promo. It might make sense to actually put them on promo after the holiday, but use 420 to potentially change or influence the way that they purchase. So don't do the eights that they always purchase. Maybe try eights that they don't purchase and see if you can guide them into a different product category or subcategory or even brand. And how impactful that would be if they like those products. So there's some strategy around what are you offering, who are you offering it to, and when, and segmentation and understanding who is purchasing is like the most important part of that.
Yeah. And 420 is on a Saturday this month or this year.
Yeah.
Anything specific about that? Or it's just going to be a big lead up?
Well, it's important to note that it's like Saturdays are usually a pretty good day anyways. Right. And so when you're looking at review, you need to consider what your demand increase was versus your baseline. So this will be like in post review, but in forward thinking about the promotions, you have a group of customers who typically maybe are like working Monday through Friday, or other 420 periods have been during days of work. This one isn't. So I think that there is an opportunity here to leverage a lot of traffic on that Saturday specifically, whereas usually you see it dispersed across a couple weekdays. And that would be a call out, is to say, how short are you running your promos before 420, and what is the actual traffic you're expecting to see in store on the Saturday, and extension by that Sunday as well after 420.
Amazing. Krista, you've given us a lot to think about as always. I thank you for joining us here today on Cultivated Live. We're going to wrap it up. We do encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Also follow Krista and her team on LinkedIn and wherever they are, because they're awesome. So follow them, follow us on LinkedIn, and smash the subscribe button. I have to say that on YouTube. We'll see you here tomorrow, which is Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Have a great Thursday, everybody. Remember, buy cannabis at your local dispensary. It'll really help Krista and her crew as they gear up for telling everybody how to run an efficient and profitable operation. Krista, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.